Backspacer by Charlie Rowe, Chapter 1. The man who writes books it. Quiet, slow, uneventful. The first part of the drive was a welcome break from the suffocating tension back home. They sped through small towns over narrow roads, with neither saying very much to the other. André seriously considered driving their Italian sedan directly into an active volcano before making this trip again. "This isn't my fault." Monique sharply garrisoned her apology. André laughed as endless wilderness rushed by their windows in the auburn fog. He and Monique made the last-minute decision to visit the author, personal friend, and pain-in-the-ass Jonah Herald. His writer on the run was living in some century home out here somewhere deep in the woods. André wasn't a country boy. He didn't want to look at the evidence. He wanted to maintain his belief that he was right. He would stop at nothing to win an argument, even if it put him through hell to do so. Anyone who disagreed with the man could surely bank on his reproach. As for these qualities, he was a top-notch book agent. They had been on the road for over 4 hours. The air was thick with fog. There were no streetlights, no houses in sight. The last town had a population of 55. There was little to no cell service out here, and André dreaded not knowing what was around the corner. There was no answer on Jonah's cell, no sign of life online. It was like they had fallen off the face of the earth. To say Herald was an eccentric would be an understatement. He was passionate and crazy, and he certainly didn't shy away from the finer things in life. His rotten luck, however, had inspired some fantastically frightening horror fiction. Now all had gone dark. His true whereabouts had gone viral with his more enthusiastic fans. The vocal majority on Reddit believed Jonah had met his demise in a fiery boat accident. Not very original. Since the crucified corpse, Jonah hadn't left the confines of that little country house. After reading Corpse, one histrionic critic wrote Herald was unqualified to write true horror. Then what should have been just another boring book review you'd normally rest your coffee on grew into a full-blown knockdown drag-out internet battle. The hack critic admitted that he almost enjoyed The Little Potboiler, but felt compelled to express his disgust by reviewing Herald as a short-sighted artist with a narcissistic personality with apparently no interest in the artistic process. He simply wants to make money and be famous. Jonah's blood boiled. "I find it easier to keep up the whole charade if people do not suspect that I murdered some random fool and embalmed him in my basement." This was said in a crappy college radio interview and was immediately taken out of context by mainstream journalists on a slow news day. Dubstep auto-tunes of Herald's passive-aggressive diatribe made the rounds on U2. Late-night talk show hosts gleefully skewered his spooky, awkwardly worded comeback. So it was not surprising that he was perceived as a dim-witted lunatic by the public. Herald may have become disillusioned with his newfound infamy, but he seemed to be reveling in the ripple effect. The blowback made him positively giddy. Then, naturally, off to live the good, clean country life in some isolated family fixer-upper. André knew one thing for sure. If all his efforts were for nothing, Herald would wish he actually was in a burning rowboat. When André mentioned the Seattle book event, Herald elegantly replied that he was looking forward to meeting any fans who may have survived the pandemic. André said Jonah's early work may be unfamiliar to a new generation of fans. A fresh look at a previously unpublished work, like Death Knell, could attract a newer audience of readers. Then their one-on-one veered into a sharp 180. Jonah stated he was of two minds. One, a creative being, the other, analytical. The analytical, although dominant, was suppressed by the creative personality during his early adult life. André had known Herald all of his early adult life, and he had heard this ridiculous deconstruction 1,000 times. He had no idea why Jonah abandoned the manuscript. He was struck by how very much in its own voice Death Knell really was. André argued that of two minds actually meant to be divided between several thoughts and unable to decide what course of action to take. If Steinbeck published Murder at Full Moon first, no one would have ever heard of Grapes of Wrath. He had an odd tone in his voice when he spoke to André that last time. The rhetoric was indistinguishable, but it didn't sound like Herald. "It's compelling to think the worst of your friends. Maybe the worst part was his not wanting to be found, but André understood that his friend's greed would eventually get the better of him. Herald said he believed that his neighbors were out to get him. As cold-hearted as it may sound, his paranoid delusions about Ma and Pa Kettle could easily become another bestseller. Herald's fans saw everything he wrote as gold, regardless of quality. He was so popular, Andre could have sold anything with his name on it. A writer with such a fan base shouldn't have to act so bizarre just to stay relevant. His fans, undeterred by his obvious ploys for attention, just kept devouring his work. The back of Andre's GLS held 2 black leather bags containing almost a year's worth of Herald's fan mail, which was sent to his office in the wake of his writerly absence. Letters sent to the publisher were piling up, and most of the time just getting sent back. Rather than just ignore the situation and let the world eventually learn on the internet of his absence, Andre came up with the bright idea of going to his client's old house and collect some of the mail still arriving there, along with some of Herald's writing junk, and dispatched them to the trunk of his Citroën. And there they collected, until there was no room. Herald would have done anything to avoid the spotlight, even if it meant dancing over everyone's still standing stage left. Andre knew he was getting used here. He didn't care. A handful of Jonah's repulsive fan letters fell onto his briefcase, taking his attention away from the road. After Monique put what she thought was the correct address in the GPS, Andre had demoted her to senior navigator. But she was confident they were almost there. Ignoring the GPS again, Andre took a wrong turn off Sorrel Road. "I wouldn't mind a shot of bourbon in my coffee. What was the name of the last town we just passed?" "It's Chastain Heights," Monique tensely enlightened as they drove down the road to nowhere. "From the old French castan, it means chestnut tree. Plus, you seem so sure that it was a good idea for us to go out to the house tonight when we both know how he can get. He's obsessed, our parents would say, possessed by his work." She tunneled deep into her jacket pocket in the back seat looking for a cigarette. She hesitated before taking one out, then took a deep breath before lighting it. Why would anyone live out here? It's a rural backwater, the boondocks, a nowhere land nirvana for the reclusive, riddled with bugs and engorged deer ticks. You're right, no one in their right mind would live out here, except, of course, for your brother. Monique believed that the world had become more insular in the last few years. It seemed like the world had become increasingly disconnected from the rest of the world, not just her brother. He was always a little scattered until he had a story to focus on. Andre was unusually calm. He has enough time to invade other people's privacy, but not enough time to fix his own problems. He hides behind his family and never takes responsibility for himself. He refuses to face his problems head-on. I've developed a sixth sense about this by now. Stick with me, my little chestnut tree. Monique looked at him with mild annoyance. "I'm sorry," he added hastily. "I have no idea what I'm apologizing for." Monique felt like she was stuck between 2 wild elephants. Jonah was always disappearing as though he were playing a magic trick on the kids in the neighborhood. Finding him was never easy. He'd learned to hide pretty well over the years. Before he met Katie, Monique always had to go hunting for him, and she would often find him either in a jam or working on one of his wild projects, the kinds that led him to get lost in the first place. The new team at Hatchet House pushed back on Andre's request to delay publication. She just wanted him to pick up the phone and share his work with Andre. "But you know what? This is not my world, and this isn't his either, not the Jonah you think you know anyway. I do not want to be a part of this again." Andre raised an eyebrow, having no idea what she meant by this, and again. Her lighter cast a ghostly glow inside the car. She held the flame to the tip of her last camel light and inhaled sullenly. They pushed on as rivers of fog slowly gathered on the road. The lifeless grove opened up a view of a farmhouse in the field, but Andre saw no one there, a hard-to-find driveway leading to a home hidden behind a dense grove of trees. A 2-story farmhouse with intricate fences and wrought-iron gates. Andre tried to convince Monique that it was haunted, but she rolled her big brown eyes and blithely denied him. The windows blazed with firelight, but the house looked abandoned, as if no one had ever lived there at all. Trust it to Herald to drag his family out to this tiny planet on the edge of the galaxy. The place was falling apart. Compared to the creature comforts of growing up at Camp Pendleton, this was a real death trap. Though Monique hadn't seen Jonah since her wedding day, she was sure she spotted him flying through the fog and scrambling around behind the house like a madman. "What is it? What did you just see? Chapter 2. He painted the walls with cracks. The Heralds had a charmed life. When Katie told Jonah they were pregnant, his overcharged imagination led him to write an extremely popular online horror series. This, rather coolly, led to a literary agent and a 4-book deal with Hatchet House. It was 8 exquisite years later when Katie found the perfect place. Somewhere they could all be together, where she could homeschool David for a little while until things went back to normal. Through all the lockdowns, restrictions, and the outbreak at David's school over the past year, it was a wonder that they survived at all. Her dad's old house was perfect for what they needed. Countryside, a little amity, and a whole lot of seclusion. Katie's father hadn't had much luck selling the place anyway. Robert Meyer rented them his country home with one provision: never go up in the attic. He explained that the house was over 150 years old, and it wasn't safe up there. He joked about it too. We keep the family fortune up there. Katie's dad never really kidded around with him before, even awkwardly. He had never seen the man so relaxed. While he politely agreed he would never go into the attic, his interest remained piqued. Suddenly, they were the new kids on the block in the back of Beyond, 40 or 50 miles from the nearest town. Across the county road sat a pretty little cemetery that overlooked the river. Although Robert's house needed some work at first to make it a home, the three of them were undeniably in love with the cottage life. They hardly saw Katie's father at first, so Jonah paid him generously in advance. Jonah's phone buzzed in his back pocket, and this time he answered. Andre was a bull in locking down a modest advance from the publishers for Jonah's newest book. Despite his last novel being a critical failure and his newly burgeoning fear of success, he was looking forward to the new book, whatever that may be. Katie espied Jonah's conversation with Andre from her office window. Across the field, a quarter-mile down the road, sat the object of her husband's dark curiosity since they'd first moved in. The only other house nearby for 20 miles. It was overgrown and deserted, and a wicked mews, even by Jonah's standards. Katie had moved into the city with her mum when she was 15. It had been abandoned for as long as she could remember. On the phone, Jonah sounded off with the usual fraternal swagger, but Katie knew he'd been struggling with ideas, even dodging his writing a little. Katie worried about the dark corners his writing took him to. She told him it felt like, from time to time, he replaced them with the doomed characters from his books. Now, much of his free time was spent staring at his computer screen. She could save him, though. Just let him go. A graceful spiral drew the blinds, and Katie slipped down to the kitchen to help with dinner. The setting sun cut through her swags, bringing new life to the old place. Big Leg Woman flooded out the salacious, sizzling sounds of her husband's dinner-making. Lonnie Johnson and garden fresh garlic drifted throughout the house, straight to David's discerning ears and button nose as he wildly played his video game. After dinner they sat outside for hours, and the air was electric. The evening breeze rustled the wildflowers that fenced the weathered timber around the veranda. The stars slowed down, descending like tiny pins in Indian ink. Occasionally the wind would make the 2 chairs on the patio shudder back and forth. Jonah and Katie sat back on the bench, tracing their fingers together over the grooves of the wood. Artfully concealed beneath them, surrounded by a shaggy plot of wildflowers and shrubs, was the well. She laughed at him, her skirt fluttering and flirting with the top of her thigh as she rose. With a slow smile, her permission was granted. Katie kissed Jonah goodnight, installed David in the wood-panelled study that was now his bedroom, and sauntered off to bed. He had planned to set up camp at his roll-top desk, write a little bit, maybe even lure some lunacy out of their old player piano. The house, the neighborhood, or lack thereof, the antique roll-top, hell, even the piano could bring him back to his center, to a place where he could write again. He made no more delusions as he drifted from the deck, with Katie's Kiev 88 pulling sharply at his sun-coppered neck. On the gold brick spectrum, Jonah squeezed in somewhere between amateur photographer and a second-rate shutterbug. But he was confident that taking a few pictures of that deserted farmhouse could help kill his block. The cool night air rushed his lungs. Even though the film in the camera was an expired black-and-white Kodak roll from the 90s, Katie was confident they could still process it in her new darkroom. which could also prove essential to getting the inspirational juices flowing again. He drew the long-awaited, much-anticipated joint from his lips and blew out a thick spiral of silver smoke into the breeze. His feet left the grass below. His hands fell to his sides as a tiny cyclone danced past him on the road, faint and fluid in the cool air of a summer finally fading. He felt a little like he was sleepwalking. Jonah decided the book wouldn't be about plunging down wells drunkenly, no, but unearthing the secrets of the past for good or for ill. Show people what they never knew they were missing. In the haze of his heady hyperbole, he thought about the old woman he had seen on that same stretch of road that day. Jonah's description of her to David and Katie had them in stitches, and although they didn't see her, they daringly concluded that she could be a witch. Did she live somewhere around here? Were they neighbours? The katydids sung in the swaying grass. The pebble road to the house started with a whisper, provoking him to go further past the tree line, where he would find it. "That's it!" Katie screamed from the driver's seat. "It's about a writer who moves to an isolated country house with his family, then instantly starts suspecting the old woman living next door of being a witch." Jonah offered a wry smile. "So I'm writing about an author who publishes a book about a novelist writing about a witch. It could be creepy on so many levels, and really, I'm fascinated by the house next door." Jonah knew that last one was a lie. David chimed in from the back seat. "Your characters aren't believable." In his passenger-side vanity mirror, Jonah dodged David's daggers, breezing towards him from the back seat. "Everyone's a critic, Dave." Jonah rambled across Barstow's field, lost in the memory. The landscape was full of massive trees, barren of leaves with gnarled roots, uncovered by harsh soil and stone. The lane snaked up past row after twisted row, and Jonah followed it. The dying grove nearly hid the old farmhouse from the road, but there it was, looming silent and still with the black edges of the barn and the woods behind it. A two-story farmhouse built in the Victorian style stood sentry on a low hill. High fences topped with wrought iron circled around, stalking the grounds. There were no smells or sounds associated with a farm. No neigh, no dogs or cows in sight. Nothing could really be heard except for Jonah's huffing and puffing. The farm wasn't a Gothic mansion made creepy for the sole purposes of being creepy. It was familiar, maybe not a place in your mind, but you knew it. The way it looked at night reminded him of an old Western movie set. As if looking out of a window to another time, he felt transported. The joint scorched his fingers and dropped like a log onto the driveway. Hot ash smouldered into his jeans. Jonah recoiled and remembered how he had wanted to explore the old house under the clever guise of a beautiful sunny morning. But Katie caught him staking the place out and put the kibosh on that pretty damn quick. He could have been through the old farmhouse and the cemetery and been back before lunch. To fill the void, he toyed around with Katie's hipster camera and had read a little bit. Apart from watching mice videos on U2 with their eagle-eyed English Bombay who went by the name of Shadow, there wasn't a whole lot going on. Robert had stopped by after lunch and coerced him into going to the hardware store, where the local eccentrics and Jonah's reputation preceded them. Thoroughly ignoring any customers looking for help, Dwayne and Freddie claimed to have seen shapes peering out of the upstairs windows whenever they had the misfortune of driving by the old farmhouse. According to them, strange things had always been happening around there ever since the house was boarded up back in the 80s. Freddie and Dwayne were confirmed ghost story and horror film addicts. When the humidity levels and the pollen count go through the roof, strange tracks usually start appearing in the woods behind that house. "Sasquatch," Jonah chuckled. From across the little hardware store, Robert could see a look in his son-in-law's eyes. For the first time, Jonah had a genuine reason to investigate that old farmhouse. On the way home, he still possessed that same look. "Jonah, a man has to have a firm grasp of reality at some point in his life, especially if he's got a family. So if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you'd better just hold on." Robert was a quiet, reserved man, never having much to do with any of his neighbours or the people in the town. Rumour had it he might have been up to something in his garage, but no one could be sure because he was a pretty private person. Plus, Jonah had snooped. Found nothing. "Do not listen to those two screwballs back at Barker's. You think that farmhouse is mysterious? My new upstairs neighbours are artists. They don't even own a stick of furniture. Can you believe that? Don't go over there, Joe. Trust me. It is not worth the price of admission. He dropped Jonah back at the house, knowing better than to make him promise. That farmhouse is none of our business. You're safer at home. Jonah surveyed the creepy old farmhouse. The steps on the back porch seemed like a sure way to break his neck. He wasn't as thrilled about going in either, but the novelty hadn't worn off just yet. Just what was inside the dark and dirty walls of this shadowy old farm, buried out here in the wild and near-complete darkness? The run-down porch with its crooked, broken steps enticed him to at least peek in the windows and judge for himself. Bad boys ain't afraid of no ghosts, or of using double negatives in a sentence for that matter. The joint he'd scored from fanboy Freddy still smouldered in a diesel-soaked patch of dirt behind him. Then it gingerly rolled away on the wind, lighting a greasy rag that immediately swelled into a fiery blue-orange sun. He pulled himself together, madly kicking dirt on top of the flames. After stomping it into the ground, he hopelessly contemplated lighting up a cigarette to celebrate. The sugar-laced instructions he had been given at breakfast still lingered in his mind. When you go to the haunted house, go to the big portal by the door. You'll be teleported into an awesome adventure. As milk rolled down his chin, David didn't waver. Just keep looking forward, Jonah. Don't look back. Don't let the bad guys see your face. Jonah marveled at David's sage defensive strategies. He was no match for his son's tactical genius. Even the watery-eyed clown on the front of the Circus Smack cereal box slapped on a polite smile. It was midnight now, and David was busy fever-dreaming fireflies back in his grandfather's old study. Menacing stretches of cobalt sailed in across the summer night sky, and there was an all-too-instant change in the air. He still wasn't sure if he should go inside or just run like hell back home. The swollen, fissured steps creaked under his feet. Bad boys, no ghosts. Force of habit made him pull down on the old brass door knocker. The hammer exploded off its hinge and dropped dead on the wooden planks below. The sound echoed through the house as his words trembled under the newly starless sky. That is a sorry excuse for a portal. His best parlor trick was atmosphere. His books always started with a place that sounded charming, inviting, or safe. But Jonah faithfully employed a rogue's gallery of characters and unreliable narrators, all too willing to dupe the reader into thinking he or she were in safe hands. Jonah tapped blindly along the wall in a futile attempt to find a switch. Why in the hell would there be power, Jonah? His eyes slowly adapted to the dark, and an eerie blue miasma permeated the kitchen. Cobwebs clung to the walls and every corner. The air preyed on every inch of exposed skin. An old typewriter and a dozen old photos lay spread out across the linoleum kitchen table. The pictures showed a woman working doggedly at a sink, tending to her garden, and playing with two young boys on the swing set that still lay akimbo in the backyard. The faces of the boys in the photos were crudely scraped away. The brittle yellowed stationery held the names, Barstow and Robinson. We want you to see your loved ones, who may have had a difficult or distressing death, looking peaceful and serene. We want your last enduring memory to be a good one. We set the features. We sew the mouth and shut the eyes. Tattered layers of wallpaper shone through the house like doorways to otherworldly dimensions. It had been quite a few years since Jonah had smoked pot. The smoke he did manage to attain had set him adrift into a space between two places, in a time lost forever. Sounds of dripping water echoed through the empty halls upstairs, as though every door was wide open. The living room's busted-out, dirt-caked windows looked out onto the barn. An icy draught poured across his back. The farmhouse sat cold and empty in his bones. It needed a fire. The dark was deceiving, and after almost plunging headlong into the hole at the heart of the living room stairs, Jonah gingerly double-backed over the narrow, rotted beams and stalked back to the kitchen. He tried to get his breath back, tried to focus on the here and now. For a moment, he laid down the camera and ran his fingers over the silken red marks on his neck. After suspiciously re-examining the typewriter, he saw no identifying marks or engravings that would indicate a previous owner, other than their names plastered on every scrap of stationery. His thoughts further contested as his fingers examined its keys. He was sure neither Barstow nor Robinson would mind their antique Underwood going to a good home. Sew the mouth. The physicality of writing with a typewriter again made him stoned with anticipation. His awareness was awash with thoughts of writing the next great American horror novel on that filth-encrusted beauty. Underwood revolutionized the writing world back in the 1860s. They were considered to be one of the most beautiful machines ever invented. For the love of Christ, King wrote The Dark Tower on an Underwood. These handy little typewriters were slightly smaller and could be dated by their keys. If it had 4 rows, it was from the 30s or 40s. But if it had 3 rows, it could be dated anywhere between 1919 and 1929. Jonah just wanted to check out the serial number under the carriage. He snatched up the old typewriter like a creature devouring its intended meal. Rain began to spatter off the rusted tin roof. Jonah's eyes darted down between his mud-caked sneakers as a smoky, low-down jazz tune from the 20s seeped up from the kitchen floorboards. He suddenly realized he was being loud enough to be heard by whoever might be inside that house. Although Jonah heard a faint scratching and smelled what he thought could be rotten food, he followed the powerful, soulful voice of Bessie Smith's I Ain't Got to Play No Second Fiddle, swelling up from the basement stairs. She sang with melancholy, and she had a particularly delicate bluesy inflection in her quieter songs. He could still hear his deadpan inner voice commenting on the ridiculousness of it all. That a boy! What was that smell? He stifled his nauseated laughter as the scratching grew louder. Ironic detachment was for cowards. Steadying the typewriter in his hands, he gingerly crept down the oddly carved cellar steps, holding his breath. Shut the eyes. Lightning blasted through the murky basement windows, revealing too much without warning, and Jonah's seconds slowed to hours. Bones lay scattered across the dirt floor downstairs. Bottleflies crawled out of a meatless ribcage and buzzed off to rot in its shadows. A body lay bloodied, head over heels at the foot of the stairs. The scratcher, only half dead, became frenzied when he saw Jonah, as if he were somehow in more danger. A saucer-eyed Jonah swore every word he knew, though nothing came out. Never one to pass up a chance to save his own skin, he decided to put as much distance between him and the scratcher as humanly possible. Jonah scrambled clumsily back up the basement stairs, still clutching to the Underwood. Another splash of lightning ushered in an awful, raucous, guttural laughter coming from somewhere inside the house, a nasty, teasing, maniacal laugh that stuck in Jonah's head and made his skin crawl. He charged out the back door into the rain, and the wind was seething. He sloshed and stumbled around the back of the house in search of the path that led him there. The old typewriter clicked and clacked in his cataleptic arms as the torrents burbled down around them. What was he doing? Was he really taking this with him? His stoned rationalization was that he was going through some kind of metaphysical experience that allowed him to relive the life of the previous owner of the house, through their eyes. Maybe that misplaced soul also took a shine to the old Underwood, by which he too had now become possessed. Or those 2 townies he met at Barker's laced their weed with embalming fluid. Behind him, 2 old headlights glowed in the rain, honing in like bloodhounds onto the farmhouse. He livened his step. Even in the rain, a faint trilling could still be heard, filtering through the vine-tangled verdure stretching between the 2 properties. Jonah got bogged down in the mud, but recovered brilliantly, losing only one of his shoes and a sock. He dreamed of being back at home in bed. He caught the sound of the wind chimes swinging wildly from the overhang back home. Just keep looking forward, Jonah. Don't look back. Jonah closely resembled a man approaching his destiny. The screen door on the sunroom let out a cheery squeak. His jeans were drenched, splattered with ink and dirt. His old concert t-shirt clung to his back. Jonah sat the Underwood typewriter down on a checkerboard table and crept around the sun deck, searching frantically in the shadows. He slumped down on the edge of the Adirondack with David's ragged Hello Kiki binoculars. In the storm, the old farmhouse next door looked like a monster huddled over its prey. Round dual headlights veered up the twisted driveway and cut across the side of the farmhouse toward the barn outback. The little senior citizen that Jonah had seen in the field that afternoon emerged from the same beat-up 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood Eureka. This time, she was accompanied by 2 backwoods brutes, real back-to-nature types. They carried beat-up trunks from the hearse into the open barn. They acted like they'd seen something behind the house. It was the ashy remains of the rag pyre Jonah had lit in front of the barn. One of the poor giant bastards dropped a trunk, and the old crone started thrashing him viciously. Jonah felt like he was watching something that he was doomed to see. They resurfaced from the house, unfazed by the storm. Suddenly, one of the backwoods colossi hurled something from the back steps, something that looked like Jonah's scratcher fellow. It seemed that these missing links were living some kind of secret serial killer life down there in that basement. A soft, monotone female voice listed every type of serial killer Jonah had catalogued deep inside his brain. It sounded off like a robot on opiates. 1. The visionary. 2. The mission-oriented. 3. The hedonist. 4. The power/control-oriented. Jesus H. Christ, the typewriter. They'll know. They have to already know it's missing. If Jonah went to the authorities, nobody would believe him. He sure as hell wasn't about to interrogate his freshly unearthed neighbors. He lazily nudged at his phone with every intention of calling police, army reserves, whoever, and tell them everything about what he had just witnessed. He exhaled sharply and reviewed his situation. There's a family of killers living next door to me, and have been for quite some time, and for some unknown, ungodly reason, I've stolen their goddamn typewriter. He shot another guilty glance at the underwood and repeated that he had not seen what he thought he saw. He was a little too high, his imagination working overtime. The chairman was dreamy-eyed and got a little ahead of himself tonight, he thought. He'd take the typewriter back in the morning, leave it on their porch, maybe run away, pee his pants to play it safe. The last summer tempest engulfed the farmhouse, holding back the horror. Jonah eventually retired upstairs, so tired he could barely walk. But downstairs, in the dark, the underwood was prescient. Under the rain-swept window, it slowly ticked away. Its ribbon, solemnly charged, stretched across an empty page. Property and possession danced together in perfect harmony for the author emeritus. In the morning, there would be a small stack of papers on the sunroom table beneath the underwood. Chapter 3. That Herald is Never Here Hurts. Born to a nurse and a purple-blooded soldier in the late 70s, Jonah was predestined to follow in his father's footsteps, but his body grasped him. As legend had it, his stomach could produce villainous amounts of stomach acid. Like someone placed a white-hot stone beneath his ribcage, the pain could get excruciating and uncontrollable. His golden age of gastritis kept him from military service, much to his father's chagrin. Lieutenant Colonel Jonah Herald served 3 tours of duty overseas during Vietnam. His son's diagnosis came from a renowned specialist in the field. Jonah arrived late, and the examination pushed on for more than 3 hours. The doctor questioned Jonah at length. By contrast, his father spoke only briefly with Dr. Schoenbrut, and didn't really listen to or care about his medical opinion. In his mind, the issue was settled. His son wasn't fit for military service, period. The colonel was tough as nails, and he knew his son better than anyone. Jonah was no soldier. His father visited with him in the hospital, once for 2 weeks with Schoenbrut at Vancouver General. As a diversion, the colonel told his son about a millionaire named Howard Hughes that secretly stayed in the same hospital the floor above them back in '72. At his father's behest, the military gave his son a general discharge under honorable conditions. This perceived injustice infuriated Jonah. He protested to his mother that the colonel completely disregarded any evidence that didn't fit his point of view. He brooded quixotically over all the exploiters in the world, forcing their polarizing agendas down our throats until we were nothing more than labels. His disability evaluation didn't accurately reflect his altruism. His mother suggested that he seriously consider becoming a writer. His experience, in and out of the hospitals, stuck with him as he wandered into and out of some of the best schools in the US and Europe. After a drunken dalliance with a 24-year-old Scotch whiskey in Derry, Ireland, the reckless would-be author finally figured out what his body was dying to tell him. His body, of course, had become a less than reliable narrator than usual due to his recent non-medicinal use of painkillers. It was the last of his morphine that triggered the nightmares. Jonah had hallucinations almost every night for nearly a year. As he chronicled his lucid dreams and night terrors, his bedside notebooks became a series of loosely connected vignettes with some very frightening twists and turns. In the hospitals, the disembodied voices of his fellow patients sustained Jonah's sanity and provided what passed for a social life. and those stories would turn him into an unlikely horror phenomenon. Jonah woke up late on Saturday morning, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode out of his chest. He swore for a split second that he was looking up at bleached white ceiling tiles emanating down through pale key lime curtains. His vision was blurry, but he recognized a hospital room even with his eyes closed. So he shut his eyes, hoping that when they opened in their own good time, things would be like they were before. He was dreaming again, wasn't he? Home. What the hell? Was there still some foggy bit of haze lingering around his temporal lobe? Were the dregs of a dream still camping out in his hippocampus? The cool air in the room, well-wrung pillows beneath his head, his old digital alarm clock from college flashing 12 o'clock. This, sure enough, was his reality. In his nightmare, he ran and ran, but every hallway was darker than the last. He wasn't even sure what he was running from. He sat upright, scratching at his head, shaking off the lethargy of sleep. Drops of sweat lined his brow. He was awake, but it didn't feel like the waking world. David entered and yawned, like a fuzzy ball of wool struggling to emerge from his burrow. Katie leaned against the mahogany chair in her father's workshop. A soft light spilled in through the dusty windows. She wore torn blue jeans dotted with lemon-yellow paint and tiny seeds from the willow tree out back. She smiled as she smoothed her hand along her newly planed bow. Her dad was a consummate craftsman. He'd built everything in the shop by hand over the course of the decades, and she vowed to use the workshop and turn a few of her own ideas into reality. Her father's skills were definitely passed down. She'd spent hours over the months in the workshop, becoming an amateur bowyer. This was Mark 13. I know. Who makes bows? What am I planning on hunting? How, in any way, is this a practical idea? The answers then weighed nothing. Jonah hugged his boy and hustled him into making them waffles. He searched audibly downstairs for Katie, usually the resident late riser. A small tangled thread of cobwebs shimmered in the morning sun that crept into the sunroom. Beneath the 1913 underwood was a tidy stack of papers that looked suspiciously like a manuscript, and Jonah grumbled to pick it up. Had someone else turned his sunroom into a makeshift office? It was over 100 pages long, single-spaced. That was over 50,000 words. On this thing! The old underwood sitting before him looked like it had just come off the assembly line and was in pristine condition. It was in better shape than Jonah. Where did this come from? Jonah wondered. Did I bring you home last night? He stretched the aches from his back and read the words arched across the top of the page. A lion dead to the Lord. Jonah didn't catch the Bible reference. He'd never read it. Maybe he had done something to bring a curse down upon them. It was his fault for stealing the typewriter and not taking it seriously. This whole damn thing was his fault. Jonah had secretly prayed to witness a few strange occurrences when he and Katie chose to rent Robert's house. It was a century-old typewriter that may or may not be possessed, owned by a family of serial killers. It arguably had more life experience for freelance horror writing than Jonah did. He hugged the slightly crumpled pages tight and stared at the old typewriter warming itself like a cat in the morning sun. This dangerous thing should be destroyed. The pages felt warm and soft against his chest, almost as if they were alive. Where was Shadow on this? She's a black cat. Isn't she supposed to protect us from malevolent spirits? Jonah skimmed the first paragraph. The red-haired man ran free to the well house of his beloved springs. He had worshipped her, but he had not seen her in over a lifetime. The well house was their sanctuary. Endless days spent drifting down a river wrapped in wildflowers. She had once gazed into his eyes and whispered a hauntingly beautiful song. The springs and its well house was theirs alone. Somebody was busy last night. She hugged him from behind, arms powdered in sawdust. Holy Jesus, jumping Christmas. Shit, Katie, where did you even come from? You scared the hell out of me. No, not at all. I found this, but I mean I'm taking it back. It's borrowed, I meant. Katie snuck through the minefield of creaks and squeaks of the weathered sun deck. Jonah wanted to ask her if she'd laid this all out as an impolite exercise. Instead, he chose to remain silent and gauge her reaction. She looked at him with unmistakable pride in her eyes, and he thought better than to ask. He wondered if maybe the manuscript could be the product of his altered state of consciousness the night before. Perhaps he wrote it while in a temporary state of intoxication or insanity. In less than 5 hours, he penned a 100-page manuscript and didn't even remember writing it. That would be pretty remarkable, even for Jonah. It was like he had the tiny ghost of Emil Jannings perched on his left shoulder, winking and whispering at him. A century-old Underwood, owned by multiple serial killers, could sell for thousands of dollars online. It could be right up there on the auction block with John Wayne Gacy's license plate, or the felt-tip pen used by the Zodiac killer for his "I like to kill because it's fun" cryptograms. A long time ago, my mom called me up saying she inherited this old typewriter from her aunt. It arrived in the mail, and could I please bring it out to the house for her? I had an errand to run. I got it done early enough, and I swung it by the house. It was a little terrifying, all metal and glass, and shiny black paint and gold filigree. I didn't want it anywhere near me. I kind of felt like it was staring right through me, the same way you were haunted by that old woman you told us you saw in the field. Jonah sputtered indirectly. Hope she's doing okay. I'm glad you're writing again. It brings back memories of the old days. Shit, I'll be back. The instructions say if the bow resin thickens prematurely, it can cause an exothermic reaction. You'll need a lotion for that. I remember when I was 18, Jonah's pithy humor fell flat, and Katie left as smoothly as she entered. She had been learning Italian for a year and could confidently introduce herself, talk to her family, or ask what credit cards they accepted at the local restaurant. She could order coffee at the local cafe, tell the cab driver turn left, gira a sinistra, or even chat with the receptionist at the local B&B, all in fluent Italian. The fact that none of them spoke Italian was the least of her concerns. Katie always laughed nervously whenever she spoke the language. She said it was because it was like she was speaking with someone else's voice. That was something Jonah could relate to. All that was missing was her camera. The old typewriter's first lesson felt like a kick to the stomach, knocking Jonah off kilter. He sat Katie's Kiev 88 down for only a moment before being taken hostage by that unholy Underwood. Jonah rubbed at his temples like a psychic channeling your dead loved ones through the television. He felt a pang of guilt for getting Katie involved in all this, even if he hadn't a clue what all this was. David opened thoughtfully. You know, Mr. Underwood types on a typewriter all day like every day in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was a nasty little fellow whose father obviously fell asleep during his Civil War history. You stay away from that typewriter, David. You're welcome for the waffles. In the kitchen, Jonah incubated and hatched a plan to get Katie's camera back. The people next door definitely had not seen him up close, but something clearly had its one good eye peering over here last night. He knew it. Alas, no proof. At the kitchen table, he ruefully pored over the newly discovered sun porch manuscript. Neighbors can be eccentric about private property, but he could prove this was all just a misunderstanding, right? Damage control was not his calling in life. In spite of his non-superstition, he still banked on fate and karma. He put the Sundeck pages down. This wasn't his voice. He felt a little jealous. Why and for whom, he didn't know. His temper started to grow a pair. He didn't care who his ghostwriter was or their goddamned elegant 5-act structure, and he sure as hell didn't care about that goddamned Underwood anymore, even if it was an excellent vintage accent to their home. He had to get Katie's camera back. Tonight. Maybe even find his left shoe. Catherine Rebecca Meyer first met Jonah Herald at one of those large group awareness conferences. This rather notorious LGAT started off by breaking its participants into groups to share their deepest, darkest fears and anxieties. When the games became a little more real than either of them imagined, they escaped out a fire exit together. Katie smiled. It started to feel like a million monkeys on a million typewriters. They'll eventually type the works of Shakespeare. Jonah smirked and peered through the fire door. It's more like The Godfather out there than Hamlet. Katie's eyes twinkled. Ophelia calls Hamlet up and says, "Hey baby, come on over." Hamlet's like, "I can't, I'm hiding a body right now." Ophelia says, "Oh, come on, my dad's not home." And Hamlet says, "I know." Katie laughed a dark melody and traced her finger in a circle around Jonah's name tag. While the rest of the primates inside the conference kept randomly mashing their keyboards and discussing why they felt self-conscious, this chimpanzee had fallen in love. Jonah closed the hood on his classic '93 Jeep Cherokee Country and followed its wake down the road and into town. Perhaps in the light of recent events, he perceived that backward little town as not so far away anymore. Blackbrook hadn't seen much change over the past 40 years. In addition to 2 stoplights, the main street contained a grocery store, a diner, and Barker's Hardware. The town was so small there wasn't even a school for David to attend. The people left here after the mills closed were steeped in tradition and brimming with superstition. At the Greasy Spoon, Jonah spun a heavily edited account of his late-night misadventures to his new fan friends Dwayne and Freddie. They both sipped their coffees with a sense of childlike wonder. They worked at Barker's and looked like they ate exclusively at the gas station. However, they were devoted fans and reputed maestros with microfiche. At one point, during Jonah's story, every person in the diner, even the growing takeout line, seemed to huddle quietly around them, listening intently. Freddie derailed the discussion, wondering whether it would be easier to run a marathon or to fight a bear. Dwayne contemplated why not both. The counter rattled underneath them nervously as they laughed, tears welling up in their eyes. Jonah had promised David and Katie he was bringing back a feast, and his order was up. He grabbed his bacon, eggs, hash browns, and toast and inhaled deeply. On the way back to Jonah's Jeep, Freddie stole his chance to weigh in on the crucified corpse. I nearly threw up after I read it. Critics mistook it for pulpy trash. Hell, most critics just dismissed it outright. I don't blame them, but they're wrong. I think it could be your best stuff. And that'd be saying a lot if he'd had actually read all your other stuff, Dwayne interjected. Thank you. You know, I wrote it a long time ago. It was good. Good that it was. No one ever laughed at Jonah's boilerplate comeback for that one. He never knew why he said it whenever anybody asked him about it. There was a matinee western double feature at the soon-to-be-condemned Astoria Theatre. Jonah clutched his takeout tightly to his chest and pasted himself up against Gary Cooper's poster for High Noon, narrowly avoiding 2 pig-tailed girls on matching pink bicycles. That's weird. Say, if you guys want to go back to that old house with me tonight, get Katie's camera back. Oh, you're serious? Fred's laugh was swallowed up by Dwayne's 1974 Suburban. Now I know we may look like a couple of chicken hearts compared to you. Dwayne grinned and flung his rabbit's foot keychain to Freddie. Jonah tried to appeal to their Western movie sensibilities. This is like High Noon here, guys. Oh, it's High Noon, all right. His smirk grew wider. If High Noon were about Will Kane leaving his girlfriend's camera at Frank Miller's house. With Dwayne's Elvis sunglasses on and an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips, Freddie poked his head out the driver's side door. Frank Miller! Hey, I'm Batman! Take those off. See you around. Horror Twain. Chapter 4. I know the words to that song about America don't rhyme. Gent Barstow's fields were overrun with ragweed, the soil still fertile, judging by the height of the devil grass. All kinds of rumors swirled around that old farmhouse for years, everything from the Barstow murder to the group of high school kids that vanished back in '92 to the present-day ghosts floating by its windows. Katie and David were still in town getting cat food for Shady, and Jonah had fallen asleep in the den, listening to the Yankees host the Mariners, who in turn had a few ghosts of their own. In his dream, the underwood ticked away in the sealed attic upstairs amid the mummified flowers posed on the windowsill, surrounded by mountains of books gathering dust atop their respective summits. Sanding his eyes, Jonah studied the yellowed, half-read pages staring back at him. In the wellspring, he saw the reflection of a younger man. Wilder than the forest undergrowth, his once fiery hair fell below his shoulders, very often hiding his face. He was the youngest of a family that had served the king for generations. He fought their wars and was badly wounded in battle. He endured enough suffering for 3 lifetimes. But as a younger man, he built a low-born house near a small village at the edge of the woods. His eyes grew darker. A storm chased close behind. He knew he would not reach his home before the rain. As the tempest closed in, the red man rushed to the well house, and there he would unknowingly wait. For her. The pages had read like old diary entries, with words held in amber. They also had a displeasing, musty quality to them. Jonah stared up at his computer screen as the cursor blinked, waiting for him to make a move. Lately it seemed his work was playing opposite numbers to his waking life. Same value, entirely different directions, and his nightmares, true to form, continued poking him with a sharp stick. He was startled by a shape at the veranda door. Fighting this fear was pointless, if only to escape his ideas about the unknown manuscript, the farmhouse next door, and his new passel of psychotic neighbors. Jonah indulged in yet another imaginary friend. Alcohol or anxiety notwithstanding, one could suggest that Jonah suffered from a dissociative disorder, occasionally causing him to create some very stubborn fictional friends. In any case, he rarely used them for personal gain. Sometimes they would follow him around for weeks on end, living, breathing characters injecting themselves into every facet of his daily life. They conspired over wine and shared stories over the fires of his mind. Jonah would relish every minute of it. That is, until the book was finished. Then they became unwanted house guests. He had been seeing all the characters in his books for years, even when he could tell what was real and what wasn't. He would never mention it to anyone else. Something like that could potentially ruin a career, even for a horror writer of a certain age. A lot of his writing was done in the wee hours when he couldn't sleep, or it was just easier to be alone with his thoughts. He would get deep into his work and lose track of time. It was during those times, Katie said, when she heard him laughing at something he'd written. She didn't think anything of it then. Though used to having his inventions around, he was getting nothing done. He would never answer back at first. Writing was a monologue articulated in a mirror to an audience of one. Then suddenly he would find himself snared in a heated baseball debate with a rogue like Don Oxter, inevitably knowing the entire time he was arguing with himself. Astonishingly, Don actually survived to the end of the kite, a rare feat for Jonah's dramatis personae. Bloody oath, mate. Not surprisingly, after The Crucified Corpse, the publisher made a call for stronger quality content. To his agent's astonishment, they suggested a full-length horror fiction. Jonah wanted to mature and shock his readers, but still keep them guessing how it all would end. Katie would become a full-time mother and teacher to David, who, like every other kid his age, adored Katie. For adventure, they had read To Kill a Mockingbird a little every night. David usually loved stories about monsters, however. They didn't have to be scary either, provided the monsters were well-spoken. Jonah had always thought of himself as a good father and husband. He loved being David's dad, and he prayed his son wouldn't be anything like him. His success had swept him up in the cycle of juggling his family, career, and the pressure to always be writing for fear of losing momentum. Deadlines needed to be met, and his writing was no longer a diversion. It was, for all intents and purposes, a job. Jonah had his first block after David was born. He blamed it on a lack of horrific inspiration, condemning his sweet acquiesce. The horror writer and his beautiful young wife built a new life together. Parents, acquaintances, neighbors, and strangers also became his characters, whether by occupation or by circumstance. Seeing as his family and friends would have to eventually read what he'd written, he always felt slightly vulnerable and exposed. Jonah had once attempted in vain to study lucid dreaming as a cure for what he felt could be sleep paralysis or night terrors. He had read that a third of people experience lucid dreams at least once a month, but controlled lucid dreaming demanded devotion and hours upon hours of some rather strange spadework. Jonah struggled to grasp the concepts, let alone master the technique. He grudgingly realized that his visions were nothing more than a manifestation of some anxiety or stress hidden deep beneath the surface. Far from the monsters of his youth, they looked and acted like normal human beings. He had wondered if this was how other writers developed their characters. Did his characters daydream about him? They would have to, right? Otherwise, how would they know what they should look like, or how to act around him? Back then, his imagination was spinning out of control, like an old movie projector running in the wrong direction. Though trapped in time, Jonah's characters remained his constant companions, as it had been in that one beat that he had loved them as family. Those early days in and out of the hospital, when he was sick, were tough for him to access, or even remember now. But he definitely remembered Tex. He was a bicycle courier 20 feet from the hospital when a truck slammed through the intersection, crushing his shins, pelvis, and abdomen before turning right and squashing his head. He was lying between the front and rear wheels when the pickup sped away before anyone could read the plate. Jonah used it all in the final chapter of Diaries. His real name was Brian Kremer. Jonah had read in his obituary that he was originally from Lubbock, so he named him Tex Donor, a name as practical as it was descriptive. Jonah never mentioned Brian. Never underestimate a writer's remorse. He had tried to tell his physicians about it by putting on a sarcastic face in the hope of describing his symptoms through a system of more nuanced winks and subtle nods. He never got a word in edgewise. "Police call me Tex." He sometimes had a conversation with a character from one of his stories, and they would actually respond through the pages of the book he was reading at the time. If anyone else believed Jonah's characters were real, it would have to mean they had a screw loose. Someone aware of the importance of taking care of themselves would realize Jonah's books and stories were nothing but make-believe. The doctors ordered him to stop drinking and put him on an SSRI regimen. But there was a time between the kite and the crucified corpse when strange things were going on, and those around Jonah, his neighbors and friends, wondered if he really was crazy, if it was all just a hoax, or if there was something more troubling going on. Writers always seemed to be in the last place they would ever want to be. It made him a little reckless, and that scared him. He had no idea why people liked his stories. His first book sold out within a few hours, and he was getting hundreds of thousands of hits online. Jonah didn't picture himself as a brooding artist, and he joked that the pay was pretty terrible. Jonah put his glass in the sink and saw a message from Robert on his voicemail. His father-in-law's voice crackled slightly on the other end of the line. "So you went to meet the neighbors, did you?" How the hell would he even know? Dwayne? Freddie? "If I were you, I wouldn't be popping over for tea anytime soon, or go putting your feet on their couch. They weren't exactly the ideal family, Jonah. That old woman and her sons left that old farmhouse a long time ago. Far from prying eyes, I suppose. I don't know. If their job is to scare you, your job is not to care. I'm a horror writer, Pop. It's like my only job." The television played an old black-and-white movie almost silently, as if following orders. Jonah, self-exiled in cognitive therapy for the afternoon, lay on the couch staring at his ceiling fan, wondering how it all worked. Cognitive therapists are usually well-equipped to help their patients formulate healthier expressions of their dissociative episodes and enable them to build the right coping skills to manage and overcome their disorders. Anyone who thinks he can wing it with one of his imaginary friends is going to be in for a big surprise. The real Dr. Zorro Dent wasn't the heroic figure he first appeared to be. Doomtown, published in the New Yorkian in May 2016, featured Zorro, a psychologist and German double agent. A nuclear test site in Nevada had mandated the good doctor to conduct psychological tests on their scientists and soldiers. Zeer a zephyral vase to help control ze inner voice, including meditation and pybractizing imagery. Meditation can help keep our most fervent critic, our Zelfes, in check. Z default mode network, which is brain activity which occurs when we aren't actively focused, drifts our inner voice. It is one zing to know its purpose, put Geet Hanosa to control it. Your inner voice criticizes your effery moth, and unless we can silence it, it can keep us from reaching your potential. With zephyral ways of shutting Z inner critic up, I'll help vous find ein way to truly stop your neckadiffer self-talk in its tracks. Dent's research ushered in a new era in psychology, a new way to analyze human psychopathy. With it came his twisted agenda. He manipulated his tests, weeding out what he considered to be inferior candidates. "We haven't seen ein original zot yet. Wait, Jonah Herald, this is mein favorite movie on your television, and I love this scene." Having acted as a mole, he had amassed the most valuable weapon of all, the psychological profiles of all his colleagues. Zorro whittled away at the scientists and soldiers stationed at the site, brainwashing them into thinking there were aliens among them, until they eventually turned on one another. Undoubtedly, test mannequins the world over owe the man their lives. He used his power to control everyone around him, including his wife and children. Zorro Dent was written to have no empathy, incapable of human attachment. He was a true psychopathic narcissist. But the guy was hilarious, so Jonah kept him around. "All summer long we were together. I was lo people, Josie was lo people. Sie Senador was lofipel, Sie days ver lofipel, Sie nights ver lofipel, and Heferipodi was lofipel, except of course mein Moser. Jonah felt like an asshole for misjudging him. He was dismissive of Zorro at first, but he had a soft spot. Zorro Dent was a titan among evil geniuses. He drove many good men to madness. But now he had his maker to deal with, a similarly addled subletter, and he was only trying to help. Jonah decided to ask him about himself. Are you good, Doc? Or did you want to launch into a booming rendition of I'm Just Wild About Harry? Zorro was now a paragon of sanity compared to his former self. Yet one word from Jonah found him just as emotionally volatile as ever. All right, Mr. Smarty-Bants, there is 9 reason to deflect. Z-test has already begun. That so-called memory Dr. Hybe, Dr. Arg, Herr, may have a blegarized mein motel for his oven ooze. However, the little Canadian carpetbagger could not preek the code that made mein mesod vork. Ah, the order in which the Gessians are asked is absolutely crucial to achieving well. The perfect diagnosis, really. Jonah was already apprehensive. He stood by the window, arms folded tightly, looking out at the rain and the mist rising off the fields. He glanced wearily at the clock. Time to lose the jammies and feed the cat. Okay, how about we get your little Voigt-Kampf test over with, before Katie and David get back from the store? What is this Voigt-Kampf? How does it work? You mean you never heard of it? There's no time. Okay, sit down here. Take ein few moments to breathe slowly and focus on your heartbeat. As you breathe in through your nose and exhale out of your mouth, think about the fact that your heart will stop beating zomate. Imagine the libs of your mouth turning blue and feel the blood-sloving doven in your pody. Now think about how the toes on your feet are becoming numb, groving colter. Where's this headed doc? The patient asked the doctor. Your heart is racing in its cage. Your cheeks are flushed. Ein berate of zarts a speeding pie like ein pullet train. Now you feel your heart beating faster. Your state of mind affects every single outpost on your pody. Here we go. Choose ein quick side note before we start. Ein perfect score would be very alarming. Understood? Good. It seems like you are in some kind of hurry. So we'll start with Frage Nummer 20. Do you display criminal versatility? What? No! Jonah contested immediately. There is no need to scout answer. That is simply rude. I shall ask you not to speak. The pest answers are locked inside you. 19. Have you ever experienced ein revocation of conditional release? Zorro was a mercurial masochist, sure. He had weaponized people's minds and viciously turned them on one another, but the little old guy was oddly likable. Perhaps it was his strange charisma that had endeared him to so many of his victims, like meeting your long-lost grandfather for the first time, only you weren't sure if it was really Grandpa or not. 18. Have you had many short-term marital relationships? 17. Do you have ein history of juvenile delinquency? 16. Do you fail to accept responsibility for your OVN actions? 15. Do you have ein high level of irresponsibility? 14. Are you hoffentlich impulsiver? 13. Do you have poor behavioral controls? 12. Do you have ein history of early behavioral problems? Jonah's eyelids fluttered shut. 11. Do you lack realistic long-term goals? 10. Do you have ein parasitic lifestyle? 9. Are you callous or do you lack empathy? 8. Do you have a shallow affect? 7. Do you have ein history of promiscuous sexual behavior? 6. Do you display ein lack of remorse or guilt? 5. Are you cunning or manipulative? 4. Do you have ein grandiose sense of self-worth? 3. Do you have excess glibness or superficial charm? Do you have ein excessive need for stimulation or proneness to boredom? And 1. Are you ein basological liar? Well, Jonah Herald, how do you feel? This horrible conflict is all made up in your head. Just ein vandasm of the mind. You are ein talented writer. But that makes you nine less vulnerable to your own subconscious piazzas. These fictional characters of yours. Text donor, Don Oxter, that cotammed Ox Rotten, effen yours truly, the renovant Zorro Dent. They are all just subliminal ciphers for that is inevitably coming. Next, door. Vous did it a canes or a vous magnificent pasdard. What in the Sam Hill are subliminal ciphers? Jonah thought the old croaker was full of schnitzel as he started wildly scribbling the names of several of his protagonists on the back of his utility bill. Text donor, Don Oxter, Ox Rotten, Zorro Dent, Next door. Smell sie smelling Zolt's tiny dancer. Ah, if Zees Merida Robinson were still a life tote, she would be 95 years, 7 months and 12 days old. Are vous trying to tell me vous are afraid of ein little 95-year-old Voman Jonah? Jonah's temples throbbed as if the thoughts inside were trying to get out. Zorro picked up his theme where he had left off. Well, nefer vous mind. Now they are chust shatoffs, Jonah. Put, we have to be careful when dealing with shatoffs. We never know what they might be up to. Thank vous, Jonah. I can find mine oven way out. Zorro rearranged his notes in a beat-up leather briefcase, popped a grey trilby hat on top of his bald head, and slipped out the back door, singing softly under his breath. He's sweet just like chocolate candy, or like zee honey from ein pea. Oh, I'm just willed about Harry, and he's just willed about— Ah! Katie and David returned from the pet store in the sunshine, so she took the boys to the churchyard to pay respect to her grandparents and great-grandparents. They spotted an arrow of geese flying above the river. But as they walked through the cemetery, fear stiffened over his shoulders. Armed with the only suitable Night of the Living Dead reference he had on hand, Jonah glanced over his left shoulder and snapped, "That's strange." David's voice dropped to a nasally baritone, like he was channeling the ghost of Groucho Marx or something. Strange. Never met a man so darn strange. Just plain strange. Okay. Jonah stifled a snicker with a croak. He proposed beating a hasty retreat to properly dispose of the 20-year-old bottle of Scotch whiskey he had found buried in Robert's roll-top desk back home. A funeral procession filed slowly into the churchyard. A solemn flock of mourners quietly flowed up the church steps before the service. Several people lingered by the cemetery parking ramp until the first hymn was played before running in and taking their seats. Freshly dug dirt covered the lawn. Jonah trailed behind David and Katie, and his thoughts turned to the night before, and what exactly he'd seen next door. He wondered if his friendship with the likes of Tex Donor had endured because he didn't want to face his guilt over what happened to Brian Kremer. His fingers tarried lightly over a cross-shaped elegy carved in gypsum-encrusted limestone, and he had read the words, "The brave who endure to the end shall be saved." Chapter 5. The Girl Told the Tale Cried. October 31st, 1925. Calvin Coolidge was president. New York City had just become the largest city in the world. Kiki Kyler and Earl Smith clinched Pittsburgh's second World Series crown, unwittingly paving the way for the Pirates' 46-year title drought. An unknown 24-year-old named F. Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby. A young high school biology teacher was arrested in Tennessee for violating the Butler Act, a law that made it illegal to teach human evolution in public schools. He was fined $100. And on a cold Saturday morning around 3 o'clock in a small home in the woods in Bachman near Hunter's Valley, a baby girl was born prematurely. Her mother's hands were shaking. Rose Thorley married Jack Robinson when she was very young. She shared her husband's dreams of a better life, but as a delivery driver, Jack could barely earn enough to support his family. He was her first love, but the years turned him into a man she hardly recognized. The Robinsons were scraping by. Jack never made a mark on the world, but he was a hard-working man who kept busy. Rose's mother was an indigenous woman who had also married an Irishman. Rose was proud of her heritage and identified as Mohawk, but Jack was ashamed, keeping it a secret from the family. He liked to be in charge, and he was used to having his way. The impact of this left Rose lonely and lost. After Merida's older sister was born, Rose discovered that Jack had been unfaithful, and in retaliation, she became romantically involved with one of his former co-workers. The affair between the two families caused a scandal in their little town. Rose was shunned when she became pregnant the second time with Merida. Jack wanted both girls to live with his family. Rose wanted to leave, but thought that Jack would kill her and the girls if he found out where they had gone. Both of the girls were frightened of Jack. Rose was aware that as a Catholic, Jack would never allow her to divorce him. Robinson was an alcoholic who openly used violence and intimidation on his wife and daughters. Rose would too often reveal to her young daughters how much she hated sex and men. Merida had been assaulted by several members of Jack's family until the age of 14. Authorities accepted her claims, and the events were confirmed by remaining witnesses. Rose sneered at her to put up with it and stop complaining. Jack was abusive and cruel, and Rose was either unable or unwilling to protect her. Young Merida would never be allowed to go to the police or tell anyone about what happened. Rose told her no one would take her seriously. Merida grew ashamed of her body. While she tried to avoid being in a situation where she could be hurt, she was often reminded by her mother's words, "Be a good girl." She just wanted Rose to listen, to understand that she didn't deserve it. She was in pain, and the only person she could have ever trusted betrayed her. Her mother was now the town gossip. She always overreacted and told wild tales. Jack resented Rose for giving him 2 daughters, refusing to believe that Merida was his own flesh and blood. So her father, who had only ever wanted sons, took Merida's sister Ruth to live with his family back in Bushkill Falls. Abandoned and disowned, Rose and Merida were all alone. It was hard to live in a small town where everyone knew your business. Merida suffered tremendous embarrassment and humiliation at the hands of her mother. She was ashamed that she could never please her. Lies, secrets, and shameful behavior were the seeds sown from an early age. Her mother was forced to move away from their home. So Merida learned how to be independent at a very young age. Rose didn't have any money for nice clothes. She was a tough woman, never afraid to speak her mind. She was very strict, and she forbade her to have friends or even choose when her teenage daughter would have a bath. Merida was tired of being controlled by her mother. She wanted the freedom to make her own choices. She made up stories about how her rage gave her powers, but she chose not use them. The only person Merida didn't hate was her uncle Oscar, who was a well-known jockey. When Oscar died in World War II, Merida was devastated. Rose was not able to maintain the farm without Oscar's help. They moved from Bachman back to Chastain Heights after their house was completely burned down. Luckily, no one was hurt. The constant need to move, the racism against them, and the fact that she was an outsider contributed to her reckless behavior. By the time Merida attended high school, she was a loner and a bully who stood over the smaller children. She had assaulted at least 3 boys at her school with a weapon and had incapacitated a custodian. The latter incident was found to have been an act of self-defense. Losing her uncle was a tragedy. Being confined to the house, Merida imagined Oscar coming back to visit her. She wanted to believe so badly that it was all real. She really didn't belong anywhere, to anyone. Merida left school at 17, gaining employment as a cutter, cutting up offal at the local abattoir. There, she was quickly promoted to boning, and was given her own set of knives. The knives were hung over her bed so that they would always be handy if she needed them, a tradition she continued everywhere she lived. In 1953, Norman Ellis worked for the rail yards. His best friend Sam Barnhart was killed in front of his eyes in a shunting accident. When a train hit a school bus in Bachman back in 1949, killing 13 children and the driver, Norman helped to remove the bodies. One could ascribe Norman's alcoholism to these events. He was transferred after causing several derailments due to falling asleep while shunting. As his delicate condition worsened, Norman lost his job, but he soon found work at the abattoir, cleaning up after the pigs. Then Merida started dating Norman. If he ever got into a drunken altercation, he could count on Merida to step in, backing him up with her fists. Hunter's Valley was known for the strength and ferocity of its women, but Merida Robinson was infamous for her physical confrontations. She never thought twice about consequence. They married in 1954, arriving at the service on Uncle Oscar's battered 1916 Army issue Model J, with a very inebriated Norman passed out in the sidecar. Though Norman was dead to the world, his mother-in-law's parting words were whispered softly and with a mother's intuition. "You do the wrong thing, or stir her up in any way, and you're fucked, Norman, because she will kill you." Rose was right. Norman's fate was sealed the moment he married her daughter. Their marriage proved immediately violent. On the wedding night, after Norman had fallen asleep after only consummating their nuptials once, Merida tried to strangle him with a phone cord. In the fall of 55, a heavily pregnant Merida burned all of Norman's clothes before hammering him across the back of the head with an iron frying pan, after he had arrived home late because he'd been bowling in the finals. After Norman fled the scene and found shelter in his neighbor's woodshed, he was treated for a fractured skull. Police wanted to arrest her, but Norman refused to press charges. Merida's two boys were born with a rare type of parasitic twinning that occurs in about 2 out of every 5 million births. The small town hospital was not equipped to handle such a complicated surgery, and they were forced to transfer the boys to a hospital in the next state. Martin and Melvin were born joined at the head and were separated in a ghost surgery 2 weeks after their birth. Melvin had almost died a few months after the operation. The doctors had never expected the boys to survive the surgery. The life expectancy for children born with Craniopagus parasiticus was very short. They should be grateful if the boys survived the surgery at all. The hospital notified Merida that her boys would be left to a life of constant headaches, memory loss, uncoordinated movement, and little to no verbal communication. Merida wanted the doctors to make amends for the lives that they destroyed. The Robinson boys were identical, except for mirror-opposite surgical scars on their faces from when they were somewhat barbarically separated. They would never fully recover from their operation. After their birth, Merida fell into a deep depression. By the summer of '56, Martin and Melvin were 2 months old, and although she was still legally married to Norman, he had already left her for another woman. She pushed the stroller with the boys in public, rocking it viciously from side to side, which led to her being committed to St. Dismas. Norman never returned for his boys and even changed his name to avoid paying support. Merida spent weeks recovering from postpartum depression. Not long after she got out of the hospital, she placed Melvin on a railway line just as a train was coming by. She stole a fire axe and went into town, threatening several people. Old Ted Bindlestiff happened to be down there looking for food and rescued baby Melvin from almost certain death moments before the train passed by. The police arrested Merida again and took her back to St. Dismas. She signed herself out the next morning. A week later, Merida slashed a woman's face and demanded she take her to Bachman to find Norman. When they stopped at the gas station, the terrified woman managed to escape. When police arrived, Merida had taken a young boy hostage, threatening him with a knife. She was disarmed when police attacked her with brooms, and she was admitted again for psychiatric observation. She told the doctors she intended to kill the mechanic who had fixed Norman's car, then kill her husband and his mother, when she got to Bachman. It was Gent Barstow who served as the town mortician, and he was well known and loved by everybody for his gentle demeanor. When Merida moved into Gent's farmhouse in the spring of 1979, he was well aware of her reputation. The town's undertaker was determined that their life would be a rose garden without thorns. When buried under a bunch of Gertrude Jekylls, however, death is inevitable. Merida was consumed by jealousy. Gent was often thrown out of his own house because she worried about what he might be up to when he wasn't around. On a hot summer night, she slashed the throat of Gent's young retriever to show him just what would happen if he ever cheated. Merida went into a rage when Gent told her he would not marry her. She took pictures of items he was alleged to have stolen from work and sent the evidence to his boss. Gent was fired from his job after 23 years, even though the items were outdated medical kits that he had gathered from the garbage. Their fighting became even more frequent, and most of Gent's closest friends had abandoned him while they were together. Merida adorned Gent's Victorian farmhouse with animal skins, skulls, horns, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, old boots, machetes, rakes, and pitchforks. No space, including the ceilings, was left undecorated. Afterwards, a row between Merida and Gent ended with her striking him over the head with an iron, stabbing him with scissors in the chest, and cutting up his clothes. Around 6 a.m. on February 14, 1982, a neighbor became concerned to see Gent's car in the driveway. He tried knocking on Gent's window to wake him. After slipping on the blood on the back steps, he called the police. The police discovered Gent's body after breaking down the back door. Merida had stabbed Gent with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. He awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Merida chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he stumbled back, and she dragged him screaming back into the hallway where he died after finally bleeding out. Gent's autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed 44 times, many of the wounds extending into vital organs. Merida skinned Gent Barstow and hung his skin on the architrave of the lounge room door with a meat hook. She then decapitated him and cooked portions of his body. At the dinner table, she served her recently released 27-year-old sons the undertaker's body with baked potatoes, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, and yellow squash. Gent's head was found in a pot of vegetables. It was still warm when the police arrived. Merida had arranged Gent's remains, draping his left arm over the blood-stained sofa and crossing his legs. Covered in blood and pieces of flesh, a hand-typed note was pinned to his side. It read, "We want you to see your loved ones, who may have had a difficult or distressing death, looking peaceful and serene. We want your last enduring memory to be a good one. We set the features, we sew the mouth, and shut the eyes." If Merida Robinson was still alive today, she would be 95 years, 7 months, and 13 days old, to be exact. Chapter 6. A Man Who Hunts Bears in Mind the Darkness. A dark figure emerged from the ditch alongside the SUV and wedged something up and under the truck with impossible force. The wheel well under Andre's side smoked and hissed. Dust and stone soared into the fog as they skidded to a stop, their high beams illuminating the underbrush. They both sat there, dazed, unable to breathe as a man rose up out of the culvert, holding a branch like it was a club. Andre pressed himself back against his seat as the man stared at them through the glass. His muscular face contorted in a rage as he pounded on their hood with the branch. He was inhuman. There was another presence outside. Shrill scraping sounds against their vehicle alerted them to a hideously scarred man just outside Monique's window. A tiny camera swung falsely around his massive neck. His mouth agape, he looked at her without blinking, then started spiritedly tapping on her window with huge, bloodied fingers. She hid her face in her hands. She couldn't believe this was real. His long tongue snaked in and out of his mouth like a deerhound, exposing his yellowing, crooked teeth. It was little known to either of them that the people who truly lived there were the dark and cruel family tied to the disappearance of several kids nearly 30 years ago. These monsters looked like something out of a drive-in horror movie, tattered giants slumbering in the bushes, camouflaged from head to toe. Their ghillie suits were created by using burlap strips, twine, and old hay nets they retrieved from the barn. It served as protection and disguise, blending the brothers into the trees and swamps of their family property, and as heavy as an ape. She screamed, gripped by panic, unable to look away from the nightmare outside her window. Andre looked down at the broken glass, trying to ignore the tiny shards that were digging into his hands. He didn't blink when he turned to face her. The stranger in their headlights screaming grew louder. Their ears could not hear anything but the hard pounding of his accomplice against her window. He taunted her, his face penetrating the still open space of her window, close enough to smell his breath. She grabbed Andre's hand. His mind raced. The hiker raised a heavy hand to smash in the window. Andre held onto Monique as his left gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles cracked white as he tightened his grip and shifted into reverse. The state-of-the-art SUV jerked upwards, striking the sharpened stump still buried in the underside of their fender. The truck gimbled a little back and forth. Heavy boots crushed gravel as the madmen pounded on the metal and glass, intent on getting inside. Monique wiped sharply under her eyes with the edges of her sleeve, then turned and cornered herself in the back seat behind Andre, screaming like a wounded animal. Andre jumped out of his skin when the door lock clicked. The back door swung open, its hinges grinding. 2 massive hands materialized from the fog, tearing at Monique's arms before dragging her from the back seat. Melvin noticed her pale skin, a soft milky pallor that seemed to glow under the moon. She was a raven-haired girl with razor-sharp canines and cheeks sunken just a touch. Big, innocent-looking doe eyes, naive but not wanting to believe. He pulled her into the fog, with no plans of ever letting her go. She found herself with her back on the cold, wet gravel, unable to see her hands in front of her face. Her fingers brushed against the camera hanging around his neck. She snatched the leather camera strap, dragging herself to her feet as fast as she could. He raged as the belt dug in, garroting his neck. The tiny box camera, covered in blood, captured their struggle, the flashes of light blinding them both. Melvin was blind in the fog, his own victim choking him out with a sharp pigskin leash. He wanted to capture her face on film forever, but the force of the leather strip snapping off the nape of his neck sent her tumbling backward into the brush. He let her slip away, the camera still snapping images in the dirt as she ran off. She heard him thrashing through the trees after her. Merida had warned him to do away with that blasted camera, said it was cursed. They were everywhere and you couldn't escape them. But he was angry that she was right. Cameras steal souls. Monique tore through Barstow's field and vanished into the mist. A faint light flickered on at the back of another house across the meadow, about 100 yards away. Someone was there. She had been a good runner once, but now her knees felt as if they were rubber. The fog was cold, the devil grass lashing at her ankles smelled like early fall dew. Her heart throbbed, the blood pounded in her ears. She heard him behind her, and she ran headlong into the fog-shrouded field without looking back. Monique's screams slipped between Andre's ears and down his spine. He bolted outside to search for her, momentarily oblivious to the hunter in his headlights still holding a branch like a bat. His eyes constricted as he tried to peer through the dense mist. His hands shook with fear. A grey flash cut through the fog, illuminating the darkness. The silhouettes of two people disappeared behind the trees. He could hear them crashing through the twigs and brush. Martin's pulse raced so loud he could scarcely hear anything else. Andre looked up to see his pale, twisted face staring down at him with blood-red eyes. Their breaths floated out and drifted above them as though their souls had already left their bodies. In Andre's headlights stood a giant of a man with a boning knife raised high above his head. But Andre didn't plead or bargain for his life. Martin's bloodshot eyes, glazed with death, narrowed and fixed on him. Andre lunged at him with everything he had. Monique ran until her bare feet were torn and bloody, the lights of the house blurred by her tears. A few yards away from the house, she could hear Melvin's heavy steps, his breath. Even weighed down as he was, he knew he could catch her. She was on empty. The silhouette of a roofline jutted up against the sky, rising above the fog. He snatched at her hair and she tried to scream. He lunged at her, striking her in the back of the head and tumbling her to the ground. Both brothers ached to leave their horrific calling cards. Martin's approach was more old-fashioned than his brother might have imagined. Melvin, the resident artist, wanted to stuff their young victims with mini chocolate bars, Pepsi bottles, and candy hearts. After seizing the letters in the doomed duo's back seat, Martin determined a more traditional approach. Take them to the basement, keep them somewhat alive until Merida returned. They had plenty of time to dump them if a hasty exit was necessary. The farmhouse was polluted with hidden rooms and a mass grave where the brothers had tossed the occasional bonus body over time. 25 years after their wedding, Johnny Philander's wife left him for her boss. One night after midnight, after downing a few too many whiskies, Johnny stumbled out the door wearing only his boxer shorts and carrying a bandolier of bullets. The townspeople saw him staggering down County Road 2, his chest crisscrossed with bullets, yelling about white rabbits. No one ever found Johnny's body. The authorities reported that he most likely froze to death. The local newspaper claimed animals got him. The twins were received by the heady perfumes of blood and crudely catalogued viscera as they dragged the lifeless bodies of the couple into the house and down deep into the basement. The brothers grew up on weird tales of witches, goblins, ghosts, and things that went bump in the night. Back in Hunter's Valley, just days before the boy's 13th birthday, the authorities found evidence of a game the boys played with an elderly couple who lived 3 roads away. The twins knocked on the door, and the couple mockingly opened it to find 2 deformed boys with a knife, crudely demanding to be accepted into their household. Martin then presented Johnny Philander's single-shot pistol to each of their heads before one of the brothers had fired a shot. Monique found herself locked in a small room in the basement, feeling like her head was split open. She felt her way around the tiny pitch-black space and found her chain, the end of which was locked into the stone floor. Monique hid her eyes beneath her hands, tangled in darkness. She heard screaming coming from behind the wall, but was too scared to call out. She was so thirsty that she couldn't speak. She couldn't utter a word even if she wanted to. The silence was harder to bear. She nearly wished they would just come in and get it over with. Soft, laboured breathing came from across the room. Someone was down in that room with her, waiting for her to stop crying. She felt the hard knot in her stomach and heard something crawling up behind her. Melvin would have been lying if he said he wasn't nervous, but he had to tell her the truth. Monique saw his face and she froze. No more screams, no more running away. Melvin leaned close and parted a lock of hair behind her ear. He had lost her. He woke with a jolt and caught the scent of grass and wet bark. A cool breeze hit him, and he realized the cellar window was broken. Although he had multiple lacerations on his arms and legs, he crawled up from the farmhouse and stumbled towards the road. She was gone. Dead trees loomed on either side of the road, reaching out for André like hungry beggars. Each step hurt like hell. When he reached the road, he collapsed and lay in a heap, holding his breath. He pleaded for help, his voice thick with blood. An ancient black funeral car crept down the country road like a crow with a broken wing. Chapter 7. The man run out of the house collapsed. Newton's first law states objects at rest stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. Having stared at his cursor for most of the morning, Jonah had a rogue thought to explore the attic. He knew that Robert didn't want him going up there, and was naturally worried he would find out and think his son-in-law was a looter or something, but he couldn't avoid it forever. A tiny, solitary voice inside his head pushed, "Why the hell not? You're a grown man. You can do what you want to do. Go for it." The house had good bones. Why was Robert so adamant about staying out of the attic? What could possibly be up there that was so dangerous? A one-eyed skeleton holding a bag of gold doubloons? The door to the attic was over David's room. Like all things forbidden, it had called to him, since they had first moved in. He had to walk by it every day. To avoid them becoming his accessories or worse, having to ferret out the full extent of their complicity, he waited until Katie and David went to town, leaving him by himself. He just had to see. Jonah tapped on it gently before opening the door with a single click. He gasped as it burst open, sending a cloud of dust billowing into his face. He sneezed 3 times as he made his way up the attic ladder, his hands stretched out before him like a blind man learning to walk again. It was rich with dust. His eyes adjusted as he looked around at the space packed full of old furniture, boxes of clothes, and a few trunks lining the walls. Cobwebs dangled from the ceiling where he stood. A tiny light bulb flickered as dimly as a firefly above his head, casting just enough light to illuminate the attic in a dusty yellow gloom. Surprise! The attic was full of junk. The floor was surprisingly solid, though. Why hadn't he been using this loft as an office all along? He raised the roller shade covering the attic's only window, and dusty light flooded the room. Jonah clawed the painter's tarp from the corner with the force of 10 middle-aged magicians performing the same tablecloth trick. He flung the tarp, and it dropped to the floor with a dull thud. A circle of dust and light rolled in the center of the room like a miniature nuclear explosion. Jonah's eyes lit up. This was a substantial upgrade over David's little plastic slingshot, or Jonah's Candy Maldonado autographed baseball bat still leaning vigilantly behind the garage door. Riveted to a small wheeled cart were 6 shiny metal barrels arranged in a circle with a crank handle. As the crank is turned, a .308 caliber bullet enters the barrel from a 20-round magazine and revolves into the firing position. Jonah had seen a Civil War version just like it sell at an auction for over $100,000. Did Robert buy this thing? These weapons are legal to possess since they aren't technically machine guns. Jesus, this Gatling was worth more than the house. He could only imagine why Robert had such an expensive weapon in storage. Family fortune my hat, he thought. Had his quiet, conservative father-in-law built this crank-handled harbinger of death? The Gatling wasn't built for range, that's for sure, but it could spit out some 200 rounds per minute, enough to vaporize anything that had the grave misfortune of standing in front of it. Its barrels gleamed in the sunlight. Jonah thought, if there's nothing to worry about, why the hell do we have a circa 1861 Civil War Gatling gun in the attic trained over Barstow's field? Was it being used to ward off trespassers, to hunt deer, or just to cope with an ornery son-in-law? Jonah's discovery was quickly overshadowed by the realization of what was in the large boxes under the eaves, 11 boxes of 11 by 60 Mauser ammunition. Suddenly he saw the attic in a whole new light. The old furniture, boxes of clothes, and the trunks lining the walls were a dusty subterfuge to disguise Robert's antique armory. "Did you know I was the one who found Gent? Jesus, jumping Christmas shite. Does no one in this family knock any more?" Robert ascended the attic stairs. After what happened to Gent, that Robinson woman disappeared with those 2 monsters. The police searched all over those backwoods, but it was evident that they didn't want to be found. But then, when the 3 kids from Hunter's Valley went missing around here back in '92, I figured I'd better get some insurance, so I put this together. It took me almost 10 years with a few custom barrel modifications of my own. Why don't they just tear that place the hell down and be done with it? You probably think that old house is made of wood, don't you? Well, I mean, wrong. Gent told me all about it when they built it. One day they'll try to destroy my house, he said. They'll put up pretty tract houses scattered all over my property, on quarter-acre and half-acre lots. But when that bulldozer climbs the hill to that house, the driver is going to get the surprise of his life. Under all that wood is 3 feet of stone, supported by a foundation 13 bricks thick. A funny little surprise indeed. Did you see that fireplace? Yes, very hearthy, Jonah mumbled sarcastically. Late that night, David slept soundly in his father's presence. Other than the sound of his soft breathing, the world around him remained dutifully silent. Jonah couldn't help but smile. David looked so strong and full of potential at only 8 years old. He could never forget the sense of awe, the feelings of pride and pure joy when he held him for the very first time. As a newborn, his son looked up at him with those tiny eyes, perfect in every way. He leaned over and kissed David on the forehead, whispering quietly, "Don't let the bad guys see your face." Jonah knew someday everything would be normal again, as long as they were together. While waiting for Katie, Jonah found the wraparound deck a peaceful place from which to examine the deteriorating manuscript of his mystery book. As the tempest closed in, he rushed to the well house. The woman wrapped in black robes laughed at him and ran away, leading him further out into the gale. The feelings flooded back as he followed her. The clothes on his back were heavy and soaked straight through. As the water rose, she caught him, tangled in the belly of the well house, his hands outstretched like a child. For him, she was only a memory. She held his gaze. The smell of bark and wet earth perfumed her hair. The song she whispered to him was haunting and beautiful and familiar. The well house was theirs now. Theirs alone. They had planned a quiet date night on the couch watching TV when she returned from visiting her mum. Katie contemplated what her friend had said as she drove back from Hunter's Valley. All his wild stories may simply come from Jonah's own feelings of exile or estrangement, rather than any differences with the locals. Jonah tossed the yellowed tome and stood on the front lawn like a statue. Katie looked like a liquid sunset in her yellow summer dress. Jonah cheerily confessed that he had left the 88 at the old farm. "I hate it when you leave me out of the loop," she said crossly, "like I'm a child or something." Jonah hucked his horns and waved smugly to a passing truck, to no response. "I mean, they drive by, you wave, so they should normally return that gesture in the same stoic manner, right?" Jonah felt like he'd just swatted at a hornet's nest with an inflatable hammer. It was as though her words belonged to someone else. "I know you've always had a very strong sense of individuality, and you shouldn't let the actions of others discourage you from standing out. But I really believe that your creativity can be inspired by your relationships with others. Do you know what I'm trying to say, Jonah?" "I'm on board, Katie. I get it." Jonah wished he had thought before he spoke. Not the greatest start to date night, she finally smiled. "Maybe your witch is just a lonely lady living in a small town that no one visits anymore. The end." Jonah was struck by how far Katie suddenly was to him. He tried to put his arm around her waist as they went up to the house. "You know, for a town that's mostly just cornfields, things are starting to get pretty interesting." Jonah flirted as she sighed. After she had broke up with a controlling college boyfriend, Katie was understandably nervous about starting a new relationship. Despite the fact that she was a positive person, she always seemed to attract the same type. She couldn't go back to that. Then she met Jonah Herald. He marched to the beat of his own drum. He was goofy, but never tried to change her. He respected her intelligence and treated her like an equal. He made her feel valued and special, like she didn't need to prove anything to him. Although she had been hurt in the past, Jonah's gentleness and funny confidence won her over. By the time they finally started dating, she was certain he was the one all along, and that maybe he had known from the start. Still, she wanted to see if he'd really stick around. He could be a loner, and he liked it that way. Jonah had been in relationships before, but nothing like this. From their first encounter at that awareness seminar, they became fast friends. After escaping, they ditched their name tags and he offered to give her a ride. As she sat in his car talking to him, it felt so natural. He had never felt such a connection with anyone else before. They were perfect for each other, and from that fateful day, they were inseparable. Katie had imagined 100 different ways this night could have gone. As Jonah climbed the stairs, she turned and kissed him, tears welling up in her eyes. He could feel her heart beating wildly. Katie grabbed his hands and squeezed them tight. He wanted her to know how much she meant to him. She held him close and whispered, "I'm taking David and we're going back to Hunter's Valley tonight." "This is about the camera, Katie." Jonah played it dumb. She left with David, and Jonah quietly paced their house. He ate a bowl of cereal, occasionally slapping himself lightly in the face whenever he thought that he might be losing it. The amber nightlight in the kitchen flickered just over his shoulder. He felt like kicking himself for being so slow to react, to realize Katie wasn't happy all along. He was, in shock. Everything else fell quiet in the wake of the news. Her only admission was that she had always felt alone around him. He slumped down at the table as slivers of doubt dug deep into his mind. The shock was palpable, but he wasn't scared anymore, which would have made any normal human reaction to imminent mortal danger rather glacial. Outside his kitchen window, there was a sound that could very well have been foxes knocking over his trash cans again. Alternatively, it could also have been a couple of scarred, faceless, axe-wielding maniacs partying out in the foggy fields just outside the Meyer house. Jonah just didn't care at that point. From the top of the stairs, Katie's silhouette coldly claimed that she had never loved him. And now his second bowl of cereal was already getting soggy. He lit a fire in the wood stove, knowing full well it wouldn't do him any good to investigate whatever was going on out there. "Wait, did she take our cat too?" When you hear noises outside late at night, there are probably innocent explanations, such as an animal or a neighbor, or in this case, perhaps both. It was horribly cold and foggy outside. Rather than wait for morning, Jonah decided to go right then, without knowing where he was really going or what he'd find there. His heart raced a little as he moved throughout the house. How will you deal with this? You are all alone now. As he searched in the dark for his keys, Jonah made sure that all the doors and windows were locked in the Meyer family home. He loaded the typewriter into his father's military sea bag and slung it over his shoulder. Why hadn't he bought a flashlight at Barker's? Or failing that, buy batteries for the 24 flashlights they already had? He knew what he had heard outside were not normal nighttime noises. He shivered from the cold, more of a skeptic than a believer. Regardless of his love for horror, Jonah never really bought into ghosts or all the weird creatures from conventional folklore. Cryptids, for the paranormally correct nerds at Hatchet House. Though he considered doing an about-face on his previous convictions, Jonah felt oddly empowered as he left the house. The farmhouse next door didn't seem so scary to him anymore. It was his destiny all along. The lock of his door clicked twice, and he heard the scratching of branches against the shed. His father's old military bag was made of heavy canvas. The metal buckles on the side clacked as it swung from his shoulder. The old typewriter was heavy enough. If something really were out there, trying to get him, it might help to know where he was going. He thought about calling out. Perhaps somebody would respond, asking for help. He laughed and thought better of it. It was getting colder out by the minute, but going back inside would feel like hiding, and that wasn't going to happen. Jesus, had Zorro Dent turned him into bloody Charles Bronson? Jonah heard the distant sounds of footsteps pounding across Barstow's field. Then nothing, except the stalking noise of the aphids and his heartbeat. The lights in the Meyer house shut off on a timer, leaving Jonah alone on the foggy road with only the moonlight for company. Bad boys, no ghosts. In the gloam, the Scarlet Man sought out the diamond ends of night, and the darkness filled his lungs. In the absence of light, he awoke a prisoner. He hunched on his barrel floor, straining forward to see his captor through the gaps between the staves, but the shadows engulfed him. He would be free. He needed time to loosen his binds. With his back to the planks, he imagined how his keeper would come to cower in a barrel much like his own. His body burst with pain. He struggled to breathe. He was bound tightly, his focus strained. The sounds, he vowed, were only in his head. The night conspired against him now, and there unknowingly he would wait. For her.